right. We are live in Facebook and on YouTube. We are sending this and sharing it where it needs to go. We will start our study of Exodus in just a moment. As everybody turns in, I encourage you to follow along with us. We're going to be in Exodus 22. Exodus chapter 22, we're going to continue looking at the law God gave Moses. And this is the beginning of that law. And this is the beginning of what God would want Moses and the people to do, and what he wants to, how he wants them to react, and how he wants them to handle the law. So we're just verifying that we are live where we need to. So again, give me one more minute and we will start in chapter 22. All right. From what I can tell, we are everywhere we're supposed to be. So we are good to go. We appreciate, again, everybody joining us here tonight. I know most of us are inside and have been inside for a few days, as we have been with this cold weather and this snow and ice. And looks like from what we just saw out the window, quite a bit more snow is falling right now. So I appreciate you joining us and sitting in your nice warm chair and joining us as we do our Bible study tonight. As I said, tonight we are continuing in Exodus 22. We are looking at the continuation of God telling Moses about the law and about what Moses and the people are supposed to do. Hold on, that's the wrong screen. There we go. There's our right screen. I apologize for that. So here we are looking at Moses and the law. And this started at the end of chapter 20, after Moses gave the 10 Commandments and after the people of Israel told Moses, you go talk to God, and then you come back and you tell us what God wants us to do. And so this is what God has been doing. God has been laying out the law for Moses and giving more detailed instruction about what he is wanting Moses to do, or wanting the Israelites to do. And he sort of lays out what has been said already in the 10 Commandments, and he's sort of fleshing these 10 Commandments out more and describing them in more detail and more telling more things that fall into those categories. That's what we saw last week. We're continuing sort of the theme of last week in 21 of talking about retribution, or of reimbursement, I should say, of what happens when something happens to something you've got for someone else, or something you have. Something happens to what you have and someone else has it, or someone else is seeking it. And so that's what we're going to look at. Now, I told you last week, I think I messed up here, and that I thought there was a break in the law. Well, that's not until chapter 24. So we'll have a couple of weeks till we get to this break, where we're going to see Moses and the people interacting with God. God's going to give them the covenant. Then they're going to have to choose to ratify it, and then God's going to give more. And that's going to be where we get into Moses' 40 days on the mountain. So the interesting about this is we typically think about Moses getting 10 Commandments, being up on the mountain 40 days. This all happens prior to that occurring. God gives Moses these laws, and this is all pre-Moses going up and spending 40 days on the mountain by himself with Joshua halfway up. So this is where we're looking at, and this is an interesting point in Exodus 22. Now, again, we're going to look at these from the idea of seeing the background of this. And again, the idea that God is going to lay forth here is God is laying forth not just a moral law, a religious law. God is also laying forth a civil law. God is telling a nation how they ought to respond, how they ought to operate, how he expects them to operate, and how he expects them to handle different disputes. And so that's where we get in Exodus 22. We start in verse 1, where again, we're talking about a man's possessions. Today we're going to talk about if you get if someone steals from that, and some things that are connected with that. Notice we'll begin verse 1 and going through verse 4 first. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and kills it or sells it, he shall repay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. If a thief is found breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there shall be no blood guilt for him. But if the son has risen on him, there shall be blood guilt for him. He shall surely pay. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the stolen beast is found alive in his possession, whether it's an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall pay double. Now, notice this. Let's break this down and see God's payment for this. Now, again, God has a system in place that says that the punishment has to be equal to the crime. The punishment has to be is not to be more severe, not to be worse than the crime that was committed. So it starts off with a man who steals an ox or a sheep. And this man steals an animal from someone else, and then he kills it or he sells it. He's trying to make a profit, or he's trying to get meat for his family, and then he's going to repay. Now, the interesting thing about this is he should repay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. And some people look at that and say, well, why did he have to pay 5 oxen but only 4 sheep? Well, the reason for that being is that an oxen, especially a trained and older oxen, was worth, or trained or older ox, was worth a lot more than a sheep. Because an ox, again, told you last week, ox was like their tractors. You had to train an ox how to plow. You trained him, and if he was a trained ox, he was one you could trust and one that you could would work the field easily. And so he was very valuable. A sheep was valuable as a farm animal, but not as valuable as the ox. And very few families had more than one ox in their livestock. Only the rich had more than one, and you had to be pretty well off to have one. Now, a lot of people had sheep. So God says that if you take the sheep or you take the ox and you kill it or you sell it, then you have to pay for it. You have to pay 5 times for an ox or 4 times for a sheep. Verse 2 and the verse 3 gives another break in this situation and tells, okay, well, what if this happens? This is a very interesting thing that God talks about. He talks about the thief that is found breaking in, and the homeowner strikes him in such a way that he dies. So basically, if someone breaks into his house, and again, certain animals were being kept inside the house at certain places, or he may be in there to steal valuables, and the owner of the house wakes up and sees him and he strikes him. If it's not, then he shall not be guilty. But if it's daytime, if the sun is risen, then he shall be guilty. Now, the reason for that being is because at night, if someone broke into your house, even today, if somebody breaks into your house, you don't know if that person is breaking in because they are, you don't know that person is in your house because they're there to kill you or if they're there to rob you. And, we talk about that even today, that you don't know. And so, we will talk about using lethal force if someone breaks into our house. And there is a difference, and God will lay out a different idea versus one who's trying to kill versus one who's trying to steal. The one who's trying to kill, if he's caught trying to kill someone, then that self-defense is justified. Even if someone's trying to steal, and again, they're trying to steal at night, you don't know who they are, you don't know anything about it. Again, you think of a time when don't have lights, they only have a flashlight, maybe have a lamp or lantern, and that would have took a little bit to go, and you strike a man who's in your house, you won't be guilty of bloodshed. Now, the other thing about this is this strikes a man so that he dies implies that the homeowner is defending himself. He's not trying necessarily, he's not in the purpose to kill the man. He's not striking this man to kill him. He's striking him simply to maybe hinder him, maybe trying to stop him, trying to catch him in the act. But he hits him in a way that he kills him. He says he's not guilty of murder. This is a very interesting law in that it sets up the idea that God very simply puts out that a man can defend himself. A man can defend his home. But if the sun is up and it's daylight and you can see what this man is after, and he's not after murder you, and you still kill him, then you're guilty of it because you've killed another man. And the idea is the difference between the sun being up and the sun down. At night, you can't see that well. In daylight, you'll be able to see better. And then you notice this is the man. And again, if the man is caught, he shall surely pay. He's already told us earlier what's going to happen to him. And then you notice this last part of verse 3. If he has nothing, this is going back to the thief. If the thief has nothing, if this thief steals, or is caught stealing or caught with the animal, and he has nothing he has nothing to himself, he has nothing of his own to pay back the man he stole from, then the thief shall be sold. We talked about that last week, being sold as a slave. He shall be sold as a slave to work out this payment, work out what is taken. Then you notice the last one, verse 4, sort of echoes verse 1, in that if the animal that's stolen is found and is found alive, then the man should just pay double. So here's what God lays out. He lays out, if you steal an ox or sheep and you kill it or sell it, then you had to pay 5 times the amount for an ox and 4 times for sheep. If you're caught stealing an animal and the animal's still alive, then you only have to pay double. You still have to pay, but not as much. Now, you'll notice the other thing about this, and this is an interesting concept to the law that I had not really thought about until I was reading and studying some of these laws, is that there is no prison sentence for any of this. There's never a mention of someone being taken to jail, and that's because even when Israel is in Judah, Israel doesn't have jail. They don't have that kind of system set up. They will eventually, but at this time they don't. And when they're wandering, they have no prison that they can put these people in. So these people have to pay a price. And there's this retribution. There's this redemption process paid. And so God lays out, again, the crime is the punishment's worth the crime. And again, notice the payback. The payback is at least double, if not 4 or 5 times what was stolen. So God is trying to discourage stealing. Again, this hinges back on the commandment of you shall not steal. And so God lays out these simple plans, the simple idea of expounding more about stealing. He also talks about what happens if you steal from a man because of your carelessness, of being careless, of not paying attention to what you're doing. Verse 5 of this chapter: if a man causes a field or a vineyard to be grazed over, or lets his beast loose, and it feeds in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best of his own field and in his own vineyard. So here's the idea: is that if you carelessly let one of your beasts, your animals, to get out because you're not feeding it well, and it goes to another man's field, and it goes into his field and his vineyard and eats off his crop, you have to pay for that. You have to pay that owner back because your responsibility is for that animal. You're responsible for your animal. Now, it's interesting, this idea of responsible for your animal versus the idea of a wild animal. We're going to see later they're not responsible for the actions of a wild animal. But if the animal is yours and you let it go, you're responsible for it. You're responsible for what's in your possession, whatever you have. And this continues in the next verse about paying attention to what you do. In verse 6, if fire breaks out and catches in thorns, so the stacked grain or standing grain or the field is consumed, but him who started the fire, or he who started the fire shall make full restitution. Here's the idea: you're burning some ground, and this is typically done. So like sometimes people do this today when they're getting ready to clear off some land. The easiest way to clear off land that's overgrown is to burn it. And the idea is you let this ground burn, it gets caught up in the thorns, and thorns are very quick to catch in fire, especially in their area. And this the thorns catch on fire, and the thorns are close to another field, and that other field catches fire, whether if grain is in the field, whether it's grain that's already been stacked, it's been cut and ready to go to the winnowing fork, or if it's standing, it's grown, it hasn't been harvested yet, or if it's still the field, if the field's growing. If you are responsible for a fire, then you have to pay for what is burnt. You're responsible for what your carelessness has cost another person. And so here you have these two laws again these fall under that sort of category of you shall not steal. Except here, the idea is not actively stealing, but maybe passively by being careless, by not paying attention to what you're doing. And so God lays out this law that looks after everybody to make sure everyone's treated fairly, and everyone is accountable for their own actions. Look at verse 7. If a man gives to his neighbor money or goods to keep safe, and it is stolen from the man's house, then if the thief is found, he shall pay double. If the thief is not found, the owner of the house shall come near to God to show whether or not he has put his hand to his neighbor's property. For every breach of trust, whether it is an ox or for a donkey, for a sheep, for a cloak, or for any kind of lost thing, if which one says, this is it, the case of both parties shall come before God. The one whom God condemns shall pay double to his neighbor. And again, this is the idea again of do not steal, but also don't bear false witness. Notice the man is going on a trip. The idea is man's going somewhere for a while, and he has some money or goods that he needs protected. Again, remember, their times are not like ours. Their houses were not like our houses. Even when they got through the wandering in the wilderness, when they got into Israel, their houses were mud houses, very easy to break in. And so if a thief knew you were gone, he could very easily come in through your wall, come in through one of the back walls where nobody would see him. And so what you would have to do is you'd have to go to a dear friend. You had to go somewhere nearby and say, hey, I'm going to be gone, and can you watch over this, whatever did my treasure for me? And this is sort of something we see even in New Testament. The other option at this time was to bury that. And this is what some people started doing, is they would, if they had something valuable, a treasure they couldn't take with them, they would bury it. They would bury it in the house, or they'd bury it in the field, and they remember where it was. And if the idea was they'd come back and get it later. Sometimes they came back, sometimes they didn't. But one of the ways to keep your money safe, your possession safe, was to give it to a neighbor. And so if you give it to a neighbor and he has it in his house, and while you're gone, the thief comes in and steals it. And then, and this is there's sort of different if and thens here. If the thief is found, if this thief is found to have taken this property, then the thief has to pay double. Again, very similar to what happened earlier. If the thief steals from this man and it's found in his possession, then that thief has to pay double what it's worth back to the man who he stole it from. If the thief is not found, then the owner of the house has to do something. The owner of the house has to come near to God, has to come near to the sanctuary, and would probably make some kind of a statement to show that, or make a statement saying he was innocent of this man's property, meaning that he didn't try to steal it himself. And this is what he means by he shall come near to God, to show whether or not he has put his hand to his neighbor's property, to show whether or not he's tried to steal it. And again, this is another thing, is if you give something to someone and they really want that thing, they say, oh, well, it was stolen from me. Somebody come in, they stole that when you were gone. And then that man had to go before God and say, yes, that it was stolen. I did not do anything with it. And then again, there's a question about how this worked. There's some thought, and I think this is probably right. There is a reference later on in the book of Exodus to an Urim and Thummim, or Thummim. This was some kind of device, some kind of artifact, if you will, where God would reveal his will to the priest in a certain way. And we'll talk about that when we get there. And some people think this is what would happen. They'd come to the sanctuary, they would plead their case, and then they would use this Urim and Thummim to see what God would say, to see what God's trust would be. And if he was innocent, then he would be free. If he was guilty, he would have to pay. And then verse 9, there's another situation. Notice, for every breach of trust, every breach where someone has entrusted somebody with something else, or someone has accused someone of stealing something. And again, notice this list: if it's an ox, donkey, sheep, cloak, or anything, which one comes up and says, this is it. This is the idea, is I have something missing. I come to you and I see that and I say, you stole my whatever. You stole my ox. You stole my donkey. And I know this is my donkey. He says what would have to happen is that both parties, if you say if I say that's my ox you've got in your farm, then you say, no, it's not your ox. This is my ox. This has always been my ox. You're just trying to steal my ox. We would both have to come before God. And again, probably Urim and Thummim be used. And then it will be shown who God declares to be innocent, who God declares to be guilty. Then what's interesting about this is that if one is found, or whichever one God condemns. Now notice, this is not just the one who accuses the other, but if I accuse you of stealing my ox and you've not stolen my ox, the accuser, have to pay you, the accused, double what that ox is worth. So this is an idea of trying to keep people from making false claims. This is where I say the bearing false witness. This is to keep them from bearing false claims of whether or not something is theirs. But if I accuse you of that, stealing my ox, and you did steal my ox, you've got to pay me double. So this is sort of the idea, is that if an animal or whatever a possession is found in if a possession is found in your possession that belongs to me, you have to pay double. If that possession is found to be sold or killed, if it's an animal, then you have to pay 4 or 5 times what it's worth. So there's a very big steep increase versus if you have that possession still in your hands or you've gotten rid of it. And so this is a very important thing, because again, God is trying to discourage people from stealing. And again, this is a system that God has to lay forth to a people who don't have a standing army, who don't have a standing police force, who don't have a standing prison. That's what this law lays out, how they're to handle these things. Next, we go to the idea of if someone gives someone else not possession necessarily, but an animal. Notice if a man gives to his neighbor a donkey or an ox or sheep or any beast to keep safe, and it dies or is injured or is driven away without anyone seeing it, an oath by the Lord shall be between them both to see whether or not he has put his hand to his neighbor's property. The owner shall accept the oath, and he shall not make restitution. But if it is stolen from him, he shall make restitution to its owner. If it is torn by beasts, let him bring it as evidence. He shall not make restitution for what has been torn. So here's the next thing. You're going on a trip. You're going to be gone for a while. Again, they didn't have cars. You made a trip. You had to go on foot. If you're going to be gone for a while, you'll be gone for months on end. That's a very common thing, be gone months to years on end. So you'd have an ox or an animal. You'd bring it to me and say, okay, I need you to take care of this animal for me while I'm gone. Well, if I gave that animal to you to keep safe, and while you've got it, this animal dies, is injured, or is driven away, it wanders away. Someone drives away, an animal drives away without anyone seeing it. Again, not on purpose. Then what has to happen is that if I give you the animal, you have to go to God and you have to make an oath to God saying, I did not do this on purpose. I did not mistreat this animal. I didn't steal this animal. I didn't kill it. I didn't injure it. It wandered away by its own. There's just natural things that happen. And God will be the judge of whether or not he has put his hand to it. Again, notice he'll make an oath. Then God will demonstrate in some way, exactly how, again, we don't know, probably Urim and Thummim again. God would show his will, his decree. And if the man is found innocent, the owner has to accept the oath. He doesn't have to make restitution. If the man is found guilty, he has to pay double, or killed or injured, he has to pay 4 or 5 times. So this again is a very big thing. Verse 12, if it is stolen from him, he shall make restitution. So basically, if I give you something to watch over, I give you my ox to protect, and you let someone steal my ox, and you didn't protect my ox because it's not your ox, so you let it go, then you have to pay for that ox. You have to pay restitution. Again, if this is double or 5 times, we don't know, but there's going to be this restitution. You're going to have to pay for letting this animal be stolen. But lastly, verse 13, if wild animals come in, if a wolf or a lion or a bear, because they're all talked about being in that area, if they come in and they destroy the beast, if they kill him, then what you have to do is you have to bring evidence. You have to bring in the body or pieces of the body that you found. And you have to prove that as proof that an animal got a hold of it, that a wild animal killed it. And then notice, he shall not make restitution. He shall not be made responsible for that because, again, he can't protect it from a wild animal. He can't protect it from all things. And that's not to say that if a lion comes and you've got 2 oxen in the field, you just grab your oxen, not my oxen, and then you're going to be responsible. But if this happens at night, and there's no way you could prevent it, then God doesn't make you pay. And so it's a very, very balanced system God lays out. And there's a time when you're responsible, and there's times you're not. And God lays very plainly this idea of what he accepts and what he commands as being acceptable and what's not acceptable. All right. Next, verse 14 and 15 talk about if you borrow something from someone. If a man borrows anything of his neighbor, and it is injured or dies, the owner not being with it, he shall make full restitution. If the owner was with it, he shall not make restitution. If it was hired, it came for its hiring fee. So here's the idea. Again, go back to an ox. I borrow your ox to plow my field. The ox comes, I take the ox back to my field. I work that ox that day. That ox dies, or that ox breaks its leg, where it's no longer able to do its job. Then I have to pay you. I have to pay you the amount of that ox if you're not there. But if you are there and you're watching me and you're making sure I'm using the animal properly, I'm not doing anything out of the way, you're making sure that everything is up and up, and that whatever happens to this animal is natural, is nothing that's out of the ordinary, then no one's responsible. I'm not responsible for that ox. It's just natural. It's just nature. It's what's going to happen. Again, if it was hired, if I paid you for that ox, then what I paid you is its hiring fee. That's all I owe you. If I didn't pay anything, then I don't owe you anything. I don't owe you for the ox that died. And so, again, it's this balance. And again, the idea is that if the owner, and this lays up another very interesting thing, is if the owner is present, well, if I borrow your ox, and you don't know how I am with oxen, you're going to come with your ox. And if you're there with me, the implication is that if I'm doing something wrong, if I'm trying to beat your ox, or I'm trying to get it to do something it's not supposed to do or not wanting to do, you're going to stop me and say, hey, whoa, no, that's not how the ox works. That's not how my ox does this. And so you're going to watch it. You're going to take care of your property, and then it's going to be your responsibility. All right, let's go to the next one. Verse 16 to 17. If a man seduces a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall give the bride price for her and make her his wife. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money equal to the bride price for virgins. All right, now this is another interesting situation, and I want to make sure we get all the caveats right here, because one way of reading this, and some people read this and say, oh, well, this is rape. This is rape, and God doesn't punish rape. This is wrong. No. Wait. There is a time later on when God will talk about rape. What this is what we would call consent. This is if a man seduces a virgin, an unmarried, unbetrothed woman who's not with anybody else. If a woman is betrothed or married, you're talking about adultery. This is not adultery. This is fornication, but not adultery. And so what happens is if a man seduces a woman, basically if a man convinces a woman to go to bed with him, and she is willing, she consents, she's a part of it, then he shall give the bride price for her and make her his wife. Now, what makes some people another thing about this that makes some people upset is that this is, again, falling in that category of a property, paying the owner what they're worth, or what the item is worth. What the way ancient Israel worked, again, it's not like our system, is that if you had a daughter, you would get paid for that daughter when someone got ready to marry her. She was your property. And so this is what this is doing, is basically a man is stealing this bride from her father that he could give to someone else. And this is why he's got to pay for her. He's got to pay the bride price for her. He's got to pay her dowry. And again, this is an odd term to us, but what would happen in the ancient world, if you don't know, when you got ready to marry a girl, or you got a girl you wanted to marry, you or your father would go to her father, and you would work out a deal. It could be sheep, could be donkey, could be oxen, could be all kind of things, but you would go and you'd pay a price for her. And when you pay a price for her, she'll become betrothed to you. And as soon as she was betrothed to you, engaged, what we call engaged, it was legally married. Now, you weren't able to be with each other physically, but you were technically married. This is the interesting thing, that the hiccup in the story of Jesus in Matthew 1, when it talks about Mary and Joseph as being betrothed. They're married, but Joseph has not been with her. This is the idea. Now, this is for one who hasn't been betrothed, who hasn't been bought yet. you would have to go and you had to pay her father the bride price. And then if he accepts that bride price, if he accepts your offer to marry his daughter, then you'll pay the bride price, and then she'll be your wife. You're going to be with her forever. Verse 17, the father has the ability to refuse to give her to him. The father has the ability to refuse to give his daughter away. And again, he shall pay money equal to the bride price for virgin. So if a man seduces a woman and he sleeps with her, and then he comes to the father. They reveal what's happened. They come to the father and offer to buy her, to pay her dowry, her bride price. And the father says, "No, I'm not going to accept it. I'm not going to give you to him as a wife." The man still has to pay the bride price. Now, what would happen here? You may say, "Wait a minute. If I'm a father, this would be what I would do if this happened to me, because I can get the bride price for her now, and then I can turn around later and get a bride price for her later." Well, the problem with that thought is not this, the thought is that if a woman that you have given away to be married, to be betrothed, is not a virgin, then that is known. That has to be revealed. So basically what happens is, and this may sound insensitive, but I want you to get the idea, is that when you have a daughter who has been with another man who's not her husband, and another man comes to want her, that other man views her almost like damaged goods. She's not going to be worth as much as she was if she was a virgin. And again, that sounds barbaric. That sounds bad to us, but this was their way. And it's not just Israel. This is all the Middle East. This is how that whole area was. And so this is why God says that if a man does this to a girl and the father refuses to let her be his wife, the man still has to pay the bride price. He has to pay for what he stole, but he doesn't get the woman. He doesn't get the girl. And then that girl will go to someone else. But again, that the man who gets the girl after the other man's had her, she's going to be viewed as damaged goods. She's going to be viewed as one who's not as valuable. And again, I hate to say that in our culture, our mindset, that sounds bad. But again, as far as a property, as something that belongs to you, they've been damaged goods. And there's really no way around that. Again, we could often make that argument even today, can't we? We can make that argument even today that in our world, for our young people, they need to know the importance of staying pure, staying a virgin till married, because in honesty, they're damaged goods. They're not able to be given to their husband or wife as that pure price, as that pure one. So that's a little application of that idea. We go from there. These three, verse 18, 19, and 20, these may sound odd that they're put together here. These deal with worshiping other gods. This is all about pagan worship. Notice, you shall not permit a sorceress to live. Whoever lies with an animal shall be put to death. Whoever sacrifices to any god other than the Lord alone shall be devoted to destruction. Now, notice first, you shall not permit a sorceress to live. A sorceress is also the idea of a sorcerer. This is a female priest, a female spiritual person who's trying to say she has magic. And again, it's not magic like we think of Disney magic. This is someone who's trying to do the magical arts or the dark arts by calling on the powers of their god, like the Egyptian priests did. Those Egyptian magicians, there's this idea that they called on their gods to give them this ability to do these magic tricks. And God says, if you have a sorceress, someone who says this, put her to death. She's not permitted to live. And again, that's because she is a false teacher. She is teaching people. It's not that she's magic, not that they're afraid of that. It's that she's trying to pull people away from God. And then the next part is whoever lies with the animal shall be put to death. Later on, he's going to talk again about this lying with the animal. But here, this falls in this category about worshiping other gods. There's certain Canaanite gods that were depicted as sleeping with animals. And one of the ways you would worship that god is to have a relation with an animal. Sometimes in a temple, sometimes outside. Again, this is a concept that for most of us, this we wonder how in the world they thought this was ever a religion. But there's still people today who act this way. And God forbids that because that's part of worship to another god. And then verse 20, if you sacrifice to another God, if you give your offering to another God, you're to be devoted to destruction, devoted to being wiped out, devoted to being erased. You're to be gone because that's how serious God is. And this is a very interesting thing of just how serious God is about not letting his people be pulled away by these foreign idols, being pulled away by these foreign gods. All right, from there we go to 21. 21 through the next little bit. You shall not wrong a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. You shall not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. If you do mistreat them and they cry out to me, I surely will hear their cry. And my wrath will burn, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widows, and your children fatherless. So number one, he says, don't do wrong to a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners. This was a foreigner. And this is the way this would work. It is even today. Some people today, if you got somebody who's traveling, they have car issues. You know, we always talk about when we go on a trip and something goes wrong with their car. I don't know about y'all, but whenever that happens, that makes me worried. Because I don't know the mechanic where I'm at. I don't know the shop where I'm at. I just know. And again, they may be a good mechanic, maybe a good shop, but I've always got in my mind that because if I'm going somewhere else and I'm in another state and I'm going to have to get my car there, they're going to see I got that Mississippi tag, although I'm in Tennessee or Kentucky or wherever it is, they're going to want to charge me double or triple because they know I'm from out of town. That was the way the ancient world worked, was that if you were a sojourner in a foreign land and they knew you didn't belong there, and it was very easy to know you didn't belong, just like Fulton, most people in Fulton that's been here a while, you know when people belong, people don't, they would take advantage of them. They would charge them extra for goods, charge them extra for services. They'd mistreat them. They'd capture them, make them slaves. And so God says, don't do that. Instead, be kind to the person. Again, this sojourner is a good idea that this is a Gentile, not a Jew, not someone from Israel. And so he says, make sure you look after them. And again, there are people in their midst, remember, that left Egypt with them that were Egyptians. Now, you remember when they fled, there were Egyptians in the Israelite number who were with them. So God says, don't mistreat those people. And then he goes on to the next group to not mistreat. And God is very key about the foreigner, the widow, and the orphan. God says, don't mistreat the widow and orphan. The widow or the fatherless child. The widow and the fatherless child were some of the lowest rank members of society in ancient Near East. They were at the very bottom because they didn't have an adult male in their household. A widow didn't have an adult male to work, to do business. And so that widow had to depend upon the kindness and the care of her family and the kindness of strangers. An orphan was the same way. And God says, if you mistreat the widow and orphans, this is the interesting thing about God. God says, if you mistreat them and they cry out to me, where they can't cry out to their family, they can't cry out to their father, they can't cry out to their husband to avenge them. He says, and they cry out to me, he says, one, I'll hear them. I will hear their cry. And two, my wrath will burn. And then the interesting thing about this is the third and fourth point, is God says, then I will kill you. I will be angry. I will destroy you. Now, what's interesting about this is later on, I believe it's the book of Daniel, we'll talk about this, is that one of the reasons why Israel failed, Judah failed, is because they mistreated widows and orphans. And God says that I'm going to come after you. I'm going to kill you. And then here's the irony of the whole thing. If you're talking about worldly sin, karma, the reaping what you sow. He says, I'm going to kill you and make your wife a widow and make your children orphans. Well, why is that irony? Why is that karma? Well, that means, you mistreated the widow and orphan. Then most likely, if you're in a spot where people mistreat widows and orphans, then when your wife becomes a widow, your child becomes an orphan, somebody's going to mistreat them. They're going to get back. They're going to get paid what you did. And so God warns them, take care of their neighbor, look after those around them. The next one is talking about loaning money. Again, this is the idea of taking care of your neighbor. If you lend money to any of my people with you who is poor, you shall not be like a money lender to them. You shall not exact interest from him. If ever you take your neighbor's cloak in pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. For that is his only covering, and it is his cloak for his body. And what else shall he sleep? And if he cries to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate. Number one, he says, look after the poor. And the idea of the poor is those who are completely without, those who are lacking everything. And he says, if you lend money to the poor, if one of your brothers comes to you and says he needs money, and you give him money, don't charge him interest. Don't charge him interest on what you're on. Don't be a money lender. Don't be like a bank. He says, you give as you've been blessed. And the idea here is that if you've been blessed and you're able to lend money to this person, then you ought to take that appreciation that God has blessed you, that you're able to do this, and look after this person who's in a worse state than you are. And in verse 26, if someone comes to ask you to lend money, what some people would do is in the ancient world, you would have your cloak and your garment. I believe it's called. I forgot what the undergarment's called. Anyway, you'd have an undergarment that was one solid piece that would be considered. It would be what we consider your underwear and your underclothes, and then you'd have a cloak, a big cloak around you. And what would happen is, in some people, when they would come to want to lend money, they would demand a pledge. They would demand down payment. They would demand some kind of, the word just left me. They'd want some kind of collateral. And the idea is this man is so poor that all he can give you is his cloak. All he can give you is shirt off his back as a pledge that he's going to come back and pay you. God said, if you take it from him, do not keep it that night. Why? Because that's that man's bed. This man is so poor, and there are people that were this way. A lot of Israelites were this way, that their cloak was their sheet. Their cloak was their cover at night. Imagine that for a minute. We think about how sometimes we talk about how bad we may have it. But can you imagine having to wear the coat you wore all day and having to cover up with that at night? But that's the idea here. Not just the poor would do it, the shepherds would do it. The cloak was a very important part of the clothing. And God says you've got to look after him because the nights got cold. The days in the desert could get warm and hot, but at night, the night got pretty chilly. And they would need the cloak. And then he says again, just like the widow and orphan, if he cries, he yells out to me because you've taken his coat and he's freezing because you didn't get back to him. He says, I'll hear him. I'll hear him, and I'm compassionate. I'll have mercy on him, and I'll act in his favor. I'll do what you should have done in the first place. And then we get to the last few verses where, again, he talks about the offerings to God. You shall not revile God nor curse a ruler of your people. Don't curse God. Don't speak evil of God, and don't curse the ruler. And the idea of don't curse your ruler is don't curse your ruler because that ruler is chosen by God. All the kings who were of Israel, whether they were good or bad, were of God's choice. They were God's selected ruler. Again, some lived up to God's what God wanted, some didn't. Some failed miserably, but they were all God's choice. And then you notice, you shall not delay to offer from the fullness of your harvest and from the outflow of your presses. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. You shall do the same with your oxen and with your sheep. 7 days it shall be with its mother. On the 8th day you shall give it to me. This deals with that offering of the firstborn, or offering of the first harvest. He says, don't delay. When you get that first fruits in, don't wait. Don't let it go bad. Bring it and offer it to me. That is what is owed me for what I've given you. And then again, the firstborn. Don't delay. In 8 days, 8 days after an animal or a boy is born, you shall redeem it. The animal, the ox, and the sheep, we've talked about that before, what they were to do with those, how they were supposed to redeem those. Certain ones would be sacrificed. Others could be redeemed and not sacrificed. But typically an animal, an oxen, or sheep was to be offered. They were to be sacrificed, the firstborn, firstborn of a mother. But for the child was to be redeemed. A price was to be paid for. And that goes back to the Passover, because God didn't kill the firstborn children. They had to offer the sacrifice as payment for what God had done for them. And so God says, don't delay, don't hinder. I think this because, again, I think Bart is practical. Just like us, if we don't do something right off the bat, we're bad to forget about it. We're bad to not do it. And God wants to make sure they know that he is serious and that he wants them to do this. And then we get to the last verse, you shall be consecrated to me. Therefore, you shall not eat any flesh that's torn by beasts in the field. You shall throw it to the dogs. And again, God says you be consecrated. You should be holy. You shall be holy to me. And some people will say, well, what does being holy got to do with offering these animals? Well, there's a few reasons for this. One is that when God told them how to eat an animal, there's a certain way. The blood had to be drained from that animal. When they killed the animal, they were to drain its blood, and then they could cook it and eat it. If you had an animal that was killed in the wild, sheep that a wolf got a hold of, and you ran the wolf off where he ate it, it wasn't fit for you to eat. One, it wasn't fit for you to eat because you didn't know what kind of diseases the animal had. But number two, you didn't know if it was killed the right way. It wasn't killed right. You didn't know if the blood was gone. And to eat the blood was an offense to God. And not as an offense to God, eating blood or drinking blood from meat was also a way you'd worship pagan gods. And so God said, no, don't do that. You shall not eat any flesh. If it's torn by the beast, you throw it to the dogs. And the idea of the dogs here is not you take it out back and give it to Fido. You give it to scavengers. The dogs in their time were scavengers. They were the ones who ate the leftovers and the ones who ate the garbage. And that's what God's saying is fit for them, but not for you because you're to be holy. And the difference is they're to be set apart. Other people would just eat the meat. You can't let a good animal go to waste. They just eat the meat anyway. God says, you don't do that. You're set apart from me. And that's where all these laws are. All these laws show that Israel is to be sacrificed, is to be consecrated, to be sanctified, to be holy to God and set apart for him and him alone. Now, next week, we're going to get in chapter 23. 23, we'll continue talking about the last little bit of this commandments of God, this covenant of God. Then chapter 24, we'll talk about the ratification of that covenant. Then we'll get back into the laws in chapter 25 and following. But for tonight, that's as far as we're going to go. I appreciate you being here. I know all of us are set at home, and I'm sure we're ready to get out. I hope everyone's doing well. Hope everyone has everything you need. Again, if there's anything you need that we can try to help you with, please don't hesitate to let us know. We'll try to do what we can for you. I can't promise a whole lot, but we'll do what we can. But we hope everyone's staying safe, everybody's staying warm, everybody's staying dry. But for tonight, don't forget Sunday morning, we'll meet at 10 a.m. Again, all this stuff should be gone by then. So everything should be good to go. We hope to see you all then. If not, you can catch us on our live stream. And again, if you need anything, let us know. But if not, like I say, that's all I've got for tonight. I appreciate your attention. And we hope to see you back here for class next Wednesday night. We hope you have a God bless